Hi, I'm Chris from airwindows, and sometimes my stuff is not subtle. Here's something out of to vinyl. People were interested in having some of the algorithms split out of it, and of course, there's nothing I like better than having different aspects of sound processing as little convenient units all by themselves, rather than trying to build everything into some kind of enormous thing under a big faceplate with a million things to do. I intend to further this pursuit when I get into making Eurorack modules and showing people how to do that, because if you have the right chips, like, I'll tell you when I'm building them, various CMOS chips and things, you can do stuff like octave dividers, strange logic things, distortions, and crazy diode roaring ladder filters. We'll get to that. But you can build things like that in relatively small little increments and without breaking the bank. So I'm all about making things with little tiny circuitry. And this is just the acceleration limiter, which has a lot of similarities with de-essers, in fact, out of 2Vinyl 4. So here's a good stealth kit jam. Is good to hear this one go. But it's not very subtle. Here's the secret of the acceleration limiter. It's designed to work so that you don't really hear it happening. You can see the energy here. And we're capable of stepping on that a fair amount. In fact, did you hear the tambourine going on there? That's a good little example. Here, let's show you how that works. See if we can get a little cycle. Hear that tambourine? It's kind of bright, but this is what it really sounds like. You didn't think it was that different, did you? Sounded pretty normal. Here, I'll do it again. Here's the crazy tambourine. You're like, oh, that's a bright noise. See, it's a... Then you turn off the acceleration limiter. How this works is fairly simple. The acceleration limiter is trying to find places where the signal makes a really rapid zigzag. Like it goes up suddenly and then it goes back down. It's finding these little one sample ticks because those have a tendency of, if you were doing cutting a vinyl record on a lathe and you had to make the cutting head go like thweep and back in a fraction of an instant, the cutting head just blows up. And you can hear pretty easily the distinction between stepping on it and leaving it out. Those highs are just coming right out real aggressively. And then stepped on them completely. Now we don't even have to go to this brutally damped stuff. Also, you'll notice that unlike some of the plugins that do triple roll-offs for digital purposes and for mixing purposes, this one goes to a lot of effort to make sure there's nothing up by Nyquist or anything, because it's taken the acceleration limiter part seriously. You can see it there. Our difference between the unaltered, where the highs are right up here, and even beyond, it's picking out somewhere up here. throw on the full limiting, and it's just completely squished. The super highs are just gone. But the key to this plugin is being able to set the limit so you don't hear what it's doing, but it's still doing something. The acceleration limiter is not as much a sound effect as it is a working tool that I think would probably work pretty good for real live lathe operators, although I can't take responsibility for your multi-cajillion dollar lathe. I've just made software tools that I hope are doing a really good job. You need to do your own testing as far as making sure that it's still doing fine. But this is not about doing a obvious treble roll-off. Doing the acceleration limiter like one would use for a lathe is about being able to conceal the high frequency roll-off so it still sounds like nothing's been changed. And that's done in the middle of this adjustment range, rather than all the way over in the highs. All the way over in the highs, you can see it's doing a huge amount. And with no limiting, we're way up here, but let's see, this is at about minus 63, and without it, we're up around 48. Let's take it down to about minus 57. A little more. So that's about 10 dB or so down. It doesn't sound insanely different, although that is still asking rather a lot. So what I'm thinking now, and I know this is a really short loop, but you can hear the isolated sounds easier that way. I'm going to see what I can do to just sort of kiss 6 dB or so off of this very bright noise and see what we get from that. So it's going up to about 45. See, we kind of already have it. And if I turn it off, we have the bright digital highs, but then if I turn it back on, it sounds like they're still there, but they're not as much. Or, tell you what, let's do one where it's just taking the tiniest amount off and see if you can hear the difference between that. Firstly, we'll turn this back off. Let's make that tambourine hit not able to go above 48. Let's make nothing be able to go above 48. Now it still sounds really bright, right? Well, actually we're off. Hang on. Let's do it again with the device turned on. That's always good. That can catch anybody. I am not ashamed. Well, I'm a little ashamed. But this is the sort of thing that can happen to you. So let's try that again, but with the device engaged. Oh. And you know what? It's kicking in sooner than I thought. It's fairly easy to hold it below 48 dB down. And it still sounds bright as anything, but this is what it is. to 45 and a couple of dB off there. And it still sounds very bright, but we can take that hard treble edge off of it. So there's that tambourine, and we can step on it real nicely. In fact, let's play around and try to place those extra hard tambourine hits. And that is a sample set. I think I've made it available to patrons or something. My Patreon has all kinds of goodies in it. Please join. But here's the off. So those last few tambourine hits. Let's do our crazy cycle madness again. What do we got? So those hits, let's tame those hits. Now that's already stepped on. That's so dark, so let's moderate it. Now if I do that, the hits go up to minus 48 on the meter. Now I'll just show you what we got without acceleration limiter at 0.3. Bits of them, like this spike here, are going way above that. And then if we turn it on, it's being controlled even at 0.3. And this is a logarithmic control, this limit control. Acceleration limiter is a very handy thing, but like I said, it's most useful when you don't hear what it's doing, because it's going to control some of these little spikes, but if you're not paying super close attention and comparing it to what was already there, like this, here's without, and with. And then heavily. You wouldn't necessarily go, oh, that's got all the highs completely rolled off, but the energy of the crazy little spikes built into it can be tamed super well with the acceleration limiter. That's out of 2 vinyl, but it's got uses all its own. Never mind the fact that you can do sound effects with it. Just wipe everything up here. But as I think I've shown, this acceleration plugin really shines when it's being used so subtly you wouldn't even know it was there. If you didn't know that the super highs just poke out like pins and needles at you otherwise, you would think it was completely and totally unprocessed. And that's kind of the point. The whole idea is to have it be a very non-tone hurting energy limiter for that exact kind of thing. Like if you were doing mastering on a lathe and you needed to not have those huge spikes popping out all over the place. Acceleration limiter is 50. No, it's not, because the acceleration limiter is free. This work is supported by my Patreon. The airwindows Patreon is doing fine these days. It can always get better. I give more things as it gets better, but it also enables me to do stuff like, you know, ordering my large numbers of, actually, I'm not sure if you've ever seen this. You can't see what's inside here unless I open it up, and which I may or may not be able to do just by wanting to. Well, hey, I've got another one. Don't mind me knocking stuff over. That one comes out apart. CMOS chip 4049 UBE. Hopefully I didn't blow it up with static electricity charge. It is kind of dry in here. I'm getting all kinds of cool chips and parts and things for making analog circuitry. And those could be like guitar stomp boxes, or they could be Eurorack modules. And I'm trying to work out how to bring these things to people in ways that are super affordable, so you can get your stuff built. And it doesn't just stop at electronics like that or knobs like this. I've got all kinds of crazy things in mind for ways that you can make cables much more cheaply, and just there's a lot of stuff to be done. So I'm very busy and my head is very full of all of this crazy stuff, working out how these things can be done, even if it's by severely unorthodox methods. But hey, I like unorthodox methods. And if you are one of my patrons, you will be getting all of the possible announcements, including things that don't go up on plugin forums because they're not plugins. I really appreciate the fact that people are in this journey with me, because I think it can lead to some very cool and fun places. And I've had people talking about the open source initiative going like, oh, well, I hope people don't just rip off Chris and not give any credit. Well, face it, that's going to happen to some extent. But my whole purpose of doing this is I don't have to depend entirely on the sales of individual things. What I depend upon is having enough recognition that the Patreon works good. And if that happens, I can open source all of this different stuff bit by bit, and it'll be fine. I mean, it'll be an MIT license, so you're supposed to credit me. But some of the things, like how console's most basic purest console version works, I've already communicated how that works, so you can perhaps analyze output of stuff, like run sine waves and things through it, and it'll quickly reveal whether somebody is using this technique or not. But it's not really, it's not about trying to license these things. These are open source things. The point is not to make sure that nobody ever uses them without permission. The point is to have as many people using this stuff as possible, because that way the industry can get better and people can share ideas and just start making new stuff, making new kinds of music, making new kinds of gear. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to diving in with both feet and doing everything that I can to get this show on the road. So please join my Patreon. And this has been my video on the acceleration limiter, which is free because it's Patreon supported. And I hope you like it.